Marcus Chen had spent 15 years building his fortune in commercial real estate, quietly acquiring properties across the coastal region without much fanfare or attention. He preferred it that way. While other investors plastered their names on buildings and boasted about their portfolios at country club gatherings, Marcus operated differently. He bought strategically, held properties long-term, and let his assets appreciate while he focused on the next opportunity. His latest acquisition was supposed to be a simple pleasure purchase. After years of grueling negotiations, property tours, and endless paperwork, Marcus decided to treat himself. He'd always loved the ocean, and the sleek 65-foot yacht had caught his eye at a boat show 6 months earlier. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, the engine specs were impressive, and the panoramic windows in the main cabin offered breathtaking views. He named her the Catalyst, a nod to the chemical engineering degree he'd earned before pivoting to real estate. The Harborside Estates community had seemed like the perfect place to keep his new yacht. The development featured luxury waterfront homes surrounding a private marina, with amenities that included a yacht club, several restaurants, and meticulously maintained grounds. Marcus had purchased one of the smaller properties there 3 years ago, mainly as a weekend retreat and a convenient place to dock when he wanted to spend time on the water. The home itself was modest by the community's standards, just a 3-bedroom cottage with a small garden, but it suited his needs perfectly. What Marcus didn't advertise to his neighbors was that he owned significantly more than just his cottage. 2 years before moving to Harborside Estates, he'd purchased the marina itself through one of his holding companies, Meridian Properties, LLC. The previous owner had been eager to sell, struggling with maintenance costs and declining membership at the yacht club. Marcus saw potential in the location and snapped it up for a reasonable price, implementing quiet improvements and raising the property's value without drawing attention to the ownership change. The residents of Harborside Estates had no idea that their HOA lease agreement for the marina slips was actually with Marcus's company. The monthly fees they paid for dock access went into his accounts, and he was perfectly content to let them believe the marina was still owned by the same absentee corporation that had held it for years. It was simpler that way, and Marcus had learned long ago that anonymity in business dealings often proved more valuable than recognition. Everything was running smoothly until Patricia Hendricks became president of the Harborside Estates Homeowners Association. Patricia was a retired corporate attorney who'd moved to the community 5 years earlier with her husband, Gerald. After selling their law practice in the city, she'd quickly involved herself in every aspect of community governance, serving on various committees before finally ascending to the HOA presidency through what some residents quietly called a campaign of strategic intimidation and procedural manipulation. Patricia ran the HOA like a military operation. She instituted new rules at a dizzying pace, from restrictions on exterior paint colors to mandates about lawn maintenance schedules and holiday decoration guidelines. Residents who failed to comply received formal violation notices, followed by escalating fines that could reach thousands of dollars. Several homeowners had already sold their properties rather than deal with Patricia's relentless enforcement regime. The marina became Patricia's particular obsession. She believed the docking area was too permissive, allowing residents to keep boats that didn't meet her standards of elegance and appropriateness. She pushed through new regulations requiring all vessels to be pre-approved by the HOA board, with criteria that included size restrictions, age limitations, and even aesthetic judgments about whether a boat fit the community's upscale image. Marcus had been traveling extensively for business when these new rules rolled out. He'd missed several HOA meetings and hadn't paid much attention to the flurry of emails and notices that arrived at his cottage. His property manager handled most of the routine maintenance and HOA correspondence, and nothing had seemed urgent enough to warrant his immediate attention. That changed on a Tuesday morning in late September. Marcus had just returned from a 3-week trip to the East Coast, where he'd been negotiating the purchase of a small commercial marina complex. He'd planned to spend a relaxing day on the Catalyst, maybe cruise up the coast and clear his head after the intense negotiations. Instead, he arrived at his dock to find nothing but empty water and splintered wood where his yacht should have been. For a long moment, Marcus simply stood there, unable to process what he was seeing. The dock cleats, where the catalyst's mooring lines had been secured, were torn loose, leaving jagged holes in the weathered boards. Pieces of white fiberglass littered the water, bobbing gently in the morning tide. A section of the yacht's railing lay half-submerged nearby, its polished stainless steel gleaming beneath the surface. Marcus's hand shook as he pulled out his phone and dialed the Marina office. The conversation with the attendant on duty revealed a shocking story. 3 days earlier, the HOA had authorized a demolition crew to remove his yacht, citing multiple violations of the new mooring regulations. According to the attendant, who sounded genuinely distressed, the crew had arrived with heavy equipment and proceeded to dismantle the catalyst piece by piece, hauling the debris away in large containers. The attendant explained that Patricia herself had supervised the operation, clipboard in hand, ensuring that every bit of the unauthorized vessel was removed from HOA property. She'd apparently cited violations including failure to submit proper registration paperwork, exceeding the approved slip length by 4 feet, and unauthorized modifications to the docking area. The demolition had taken nearly 6 hours, during which Patricia had refused entry to anyone who questioned the proceedings. Marcus felt a cold rage settling over him, the kind of calculated anger that had served him well in difficult business negotiations. He thanked the attendant and immediately contacted his attorney, Helen Rodriguez, who'd handled all his property acquisitions over the years. Helen listened to the situation with growing disbelief before promising to review the legal options and get back to him within the hour. While waiting, Marcus decided to confront Patricia directly. He found her at the HOA office, a small building near the community entrance that Patricia had transformed into her command center. The walls were covered with maps of the property, charts tracking violation notices, and photographs of homes that didn't meet her standards. Patricia sat behind an oversized desk, reviewing documents with the intensity of a prosecutor preparing for trial. When Marcus entered, Patricia barely looked up. She seemed entirely unconcerned with his presence, as though angry residents were simply part of her daily routine. When he demanded an explanation for the destruction of his yacht, Patricia calmly retrieved a thick folder from her filing cabinet and spread its contents across the desk. The documents outlined a case built over several months. Patricia had compiled photographs of the catalyst, measurements of its dimensions, and detailed notes about its presence in the marina. She documented dates when Marcus wasn't present, times when the yacht sat idle for weeks, and instances where she claimed the vessel exceeded slip boundaries. According to her records, the HOA board had voted unanimously to classify the catalyst as an unauthorized vessel and authorized its removal after Marcus failed to respond to multiple violation notices. Patricia explained her position with cold precision. The new HOA regulations clearly stated that all vessels required advance approval, with documentation submitted at least 60 days before mooring. Marcus had never filed such paperwork. The regulations also specified maximum vessel lengths for each slip category, and the catalyst exceeded the limit for Marcus's assigned dock. Most damningly, Patricia argued, Marcus had failed to respond to 3 formal violation notices sent to his cottage address, which she interpreted as willful non-compliance with HOA authority. The demolition, Patricia insisted, was entirely legal and proper under the HOA's enforcement powers. The association had followed all required procedures, provided adequate notice, and acted within its authority to maintain community standards. She even produced an invoice showing that Marcus now owed the HOA $17,000 to cover the demolition costs, debris removal, and dock repair fees. Marcus listened to the entire presentation without interrupting, though his jaw tightened with each new detail. When Patricia finally finished, he asked a single question about whether she'd verified the marina ownership before authorizing the demolition. Patricia dismissed the question with an impatient wave, explaining that the HOA's lease agreement with the Marina gave the association full authority over vessel management and enforcement within the docking areas. Marcus left the office without another word, his mind already working through the implications. Patricia's fundamental mistake was now clear. She'd assumed the HOA's lease agreement gave her authority over all marina operations, but she'd never actually read the lease carefully enough to understand its limitations. More importantly, she had no idea who actually owned the property she'd just damaged. Helen called back with news that confirmed Marcus's suspicions. The HOA's lease agreement with Meridian Properties LLC was quite specific about the division of authority. While the association could establish rules for residents' vessel use and dock assignments, any structural modifications or demolitions required explicit written approval from the marina owner. The lease also included substantial penalty clauses for unauthorized damage to marina property or vessels, with liquidated damages set at 3 times the actual repair costs. Furthermore, Helen had reviewed the violation notices Patricia claimed to have sent. Only one had actually been mailed to Marcus's cottage address, and it arrived while he was traveling. The other 2 notices existed only in Patricia's files, never sent or delivered through any verifiable channel. The HOA's claim of proper notification was demonstrably false. Marcus made his decision quickly. Rather than immediately revealing his ownership of the marina, he would let Patricia's overconfidence work against her. He instructed Helen to prepare a comprehensive legal response, documenting every violation of the lease agreement and quantifying the damages. The yacht itself had been valued at $450,000, with recent upgrades pushing the replacement cost even higher. The dock damage added another $60,000. Under the lease's penalty provisions, the HOA's liability would exceed $1.5 million. Meanwhile, Marcus filed a police report for destruction of property and contacted his insurance company. The insurance adjuster arrived the next day, photographing the damaged dock and collecting evidence of the demolition. The adjuster seemed shocked by the extent of the destruction, noting that the demolition crew had used cutting torches and heavy machinery to dismantle a vessel that could have simply been towed away if removal was truly necessary. Word of the incident spread quickly through Harborside Estates. Some residents were horrified by Patricia's actions, while others defended the HOA president's strict enforcement approach. The community split into factions, with heated debates erupting at the yacht club and during neighborhood gatherings. Several residents who'd previously stayed silent about Patricia's heavy-handed tactics began speaking up, sharing their own stories of excessive fines and unreasonable demands. Patricia, however, remained defiant. She called an emergency HOA meeting to address the controversy, using the forum to defend her actions and attack Marcus's character. She portrayed him as an absentee owner who cared nothing for community rules and whose oversized yacht had been an eyesore and a safety hazard. She rallied her supporters with appeals to maintaining property values and protecting the community's upscale image. The meeting descended into chaos as residents argued about HOA authority, property rights, and the appropriate limits of enforcement. Several homeowners demanded Patricia's resignation, while her allies accused Marcus of trying to undermine legitimate community governance. Patricia ultimately gavelled the meeting to a close without resolving anything, announcing that the HOA would vigorously defend its actions against any legal challenges. That's when Helen delivered the first legal salvo. A formal demand letter arrived at the HOA office, sent via certified mail and courier to ensure delivery. The letter outlined the lease violations in meticulous detail, quantified the damages, and demanded immediate payment of $1.6 million. It also included a notice that Meridian Properties LLC was exercising its right under the lease agreement to terminate the HOA's marina access, effective in 30 days, unless the damages were paid in full. The letter concluded with a revelation that stopped Patricia cold. Helen included a copy of the property deed showing that Meridian Properties LLC had purchased the marina 3 years earlier, along with documentation showing Marcus Chen as the company's sole owner and principal. The HOA hadn't just destroyed a resident's yacht. They'd demolished property belonging to their landlord on property they were leasing from him, in violation of their own lease agreement. Patricia's response was to call an emergency meeting of the HOA board, demanding that the association's attorney review the situation immediately. The attorney's assessment was devastating. Not only were the lease violations clear and unambiguous, but Patricia's failure to obtain owner approval before authorizing the demolition exposed the HOA to catastrophic liability. The insurance policy the association carried had a maximum coverage of $500,000, leaving $1 million gap that would need to be covered by a special assessment on all homeowners. News of the potential special assessment triggered a revolt among the residents. Homeowners who'd previously supported Patricia's strict enforcement suddenly faced the prospect of bills potentially exceeding $10,000 each to cover her mistake. Emergency meetings were called, recall petitions circulated, and several board members quietly began discussing resignation. Patricia attempted to defend herself by arguing that Marcus had deliberately concealed his ownership of the marina, setting a trap for the HOA. She claimed he'd been negligent in not disclosing the conflict of interest, and that his silence about the ownership made him partially responsible for the situation. The argument gained no traction with the HOA's attorney, who pointed out that property ownership was public record, and the HOA had a fiduciary duty to verify its legal authority before taking destructive actions. As the legal pressure mounted, details of Patricia's management emerged that painted an increasingly troubling picture. A forensic review of HOA finances revealed that she'd spent nearly $40,000 on the yacht demolition without obtaining competitive bids or properly documenting the expenditure. She'd hired her nephew's construction company to perform the work, a conflict of interest she'd never disclosed to the board. The demolition invoice was padded with questionable charges, including equipment rental fees that appeared excessive and labor costs that didn't match the actual time spent on site. Further investigation revealed that Patricia had been systematically abusing her authority for years. Violation fines had been assessed inconsistently, with her allies in the community receiving warnings while her critics faced maximum penalties. She'd directed landscaping contracts to companies owned by her friends, often at prices above market rates. She'd even used HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, including meals at expensive restaurants that she claimed were necessary for community business. The board had no choice but to suspend Patricia pending a complete investigation. They appointed an interim president and began the painful process of unwinding her decisions and assessing the full extent of the liability she'd created. The special assessment loomed over the community like a dark cloud, with many residents considering selling their homes rather than paying for Patricia's mistakes. Marcus, meanwhile, found himself in an unexpectedly complicated position. While he was legally entitled to pursue full damages, doing so would financially devastate many innocent homeowners who'd had no part in the yacht's destruction. Helen advised him that maximum enforcement would be legally justified but might create long-term problems for the marina's operations and his own relationship with the community. After considerable thought, Marcus proposed a settlement that would balance accountability with fairness. The HOA would pay him $600,000, covering the yacht's value and dock repairs without the treble damages. In exchange, Marcus would extend the marina lease for another 10 years at current rates, providing stability for residents' continued dock access. He would also waive the immediate termination clause, allowing the community time to reorganize its governance without the threat of losing marina privileges. The settlement had one additional condition that Marcus insisted upon. Patricia Hendricks would be permanently barred from holding any position of authority in the HOA and would be personally liable for $100,000 of the settlement, payable over time. This provision ensured that Patricia bore direct financial consequences for her actions, while preventing her from ever again wielding the kind of unchecked authority she'd abused. The HOA board accepted the settlement with profound relief, though it still required a significant special assessment of approximately $3,000 per household. Patricia fought the personal liability clause but ultimately had no choice but to agree when the alternative was a lawsuit that could have consumed her entire retirement savings. The investigation into Patricia's financial mismanagement continued even after the yacht settlement was finalized. The forensic accountant uncovered nearly $70,000 in questionable expenditures over her 3-year tenure as president. Some expenses were clearly fraudulent, while others represented waste and mismanagement rather than outright theft. The HOA filed a separate lawsuit against Patricia to recover the misspent funds, a case that would drag through courts for the next year before resulting in a judgment requiring her to repay $45,000. The Harborside Estates community underwent a dramatic transformation in the aftermath of the scandal. A new HOA board was elected, composed of residents committed to transparent governance and reasonable enforcement. They systematically reviewed and revised Patricia's excessive regulations, eliminating the most onerous requirements while maintaining appropriate community standards. Violation fines were restructured to be proportionate to actual violations, and a new appeals process was established to prevent arbitrary enforcement. Several residents who'd been driven away by Patricia's regime reached out to the new board, considering whether to return now that the toxic environment had been eliminated. The community's reputation had taken a hit, but property values remained stable as word spread about the governance reforms and the renewed focus on being a pleasant place to live rather than a heavily regulated enclave. Marcus replaced the Catalyst with a new yacht, slightly smaller and more conservative in design. He named this one the Equilibrium, reflecting his hope that the community had found a better balance between order and freedom. He made a point of introducing himself to new residents, often mentioning casually that he owned the marina and encouraging them to reach out if any issues arose with docking or access. The marina thrived under the new arrangement. Marcus invested in upgrades that Patricia had long opposed, including improved dock lighting, better security systems, and a renovated yacht club facility. The improvements attracted new members and increased the property's value substantially. What had started as a simple investment property had become something Marcus took genuine pride in maintaining. Patricia and Gerald Hendricks sold their home and left Harborside Estates 6 months after the settlement was finalized. They moved to a different state, seeking to escape the reputation that followed Patricia in local circles. Her attempts to join HOA boards in her new community were quietly rebuffed after background checks revealed the Harborside Estates scandal. The woman who'd once wielded absolute authority over hundreds of residents found herself powerless and unwelcome in the very environments where she'd previously thrived. For Marcus, the entire experience provided unexpected lessons about the importance of transparency and engagement in community affairs. He'd always preferred operating in the background, but the yacht incident demonstrated the risks of excessive anonymity. He began attending HOA meetings regularly, not to control decisions but to ensure his voice as both a resident and the marina owner was heard on relevant issues. The demolished yacht became something of a legend in local boating circles. The story spread through marine communities up and down the coast, often embellished with increasingly dramatic details. Some versions had Patricia personally wielding a sledgehammer, while others described Marcus as a billionaire who owned half the coastline. The truth was more mundane, but no less remarkable for being ordinary people, making catastrophic mistakes and facing real consequences. One unexpected positive outcome emerged from the disaster. The incident sparked a broader conversation among HOA communities throughout the region about the need for checks and balances on executive authority. Several nearby associations revised their governance documents to require multiple board approvals for significant expenditures and to establish mandatory owner notification procedures before taking destructive enforcement actions. Legal experts began using the Harborside Estates case as a cautionary tale in HOA management seminars. Marcus kept a single photograph from the catalyst mounted in his home office. The image showed the yacht at sunset, its white hull gleaming against the golden water, taken just 2 weeks before its destruction. He kept it not as a reminder of what he'd lost, but as a symbol of an expensive lesson learned. The photograph served as a daily reminder that even careful planning and quiet wealth offered no immunity from human folly and institutional overreach. The settlement money allowed Marcus to acquire a yacht that was in many ways superior to the catalyst, but he'd lost something irreplaceable in the destruction: the sense that his property was secure, that rules would be followed, that authority would be exercised with at least minimal competence. Those intangible losses couldn't be measured in dollars or recovered through legal settlements. 2 years after the incident, Harborside Estates had become one of the better-run HOA communities in the region. The special assessment had been painful, but it produced a community that was far more engaged in governance and far less tolerant of authoritarian leadership. Residents actually read the meeting minutes, attended board sessions, and questioned decisions that seemed excessive or poorly justified. Marcus occasionally encountered former supporters of Patricia who apologized for not speaking up sooner or for enabling her excesses through their silence. He accepted these apologies graciously, understanding that most people simply wanted to avoid conflict and had never imagined how far unchecked authority could go. The yacht's destruction had been a wake-up call for an entire community that had allowed power to concentrate in dangerous ways. The demolished yacht had cost Patricia Hendricks far more than money. Her reputation was permanently destroyed, her retirement plans disrupted, and her sense of righteous authority shattered beyond repair. She'd believed herself to be protecting community standards and maintaining order, never recognizing that she'd become exactly the kind of petty tyrant that HOAs were supposed to protect against. For Marcus, life eventually returned to a comfortable rhythm. He continued his real estate investments, acquired additional marina properties, and spent pleasant weekends on the Equilibrium. The cottage at Harborside Estates remained his favorite retreat, now enhanced by a community that had learned hard lessons about governance, accountability, and the dangers of giving any single person too much unchecked power. The empty slip where the catalyst once moored became a memorial of sorts, though not an official one. Marcus deliberately left it vacant for 6 months after settling with the HOA, a silent reminder to the community of what had been lost. When he finally filled the space with the Equilibrium, several neighbors gathered to welcome the new yacht, an informal ceremony that acknowledged both the past and the hope for a better future. The story of the demolished yacht and the HOA president who destroyed her landlord's property spread far beyond Harborside Estates. It became a cautionary tale shared in legal circles, HOA management courses, and property owner forums. The specific details varied in the retelling, but the core lesson remained constant. Authority without accountability inevitably leads to disaster, and the powerful ignore property rights at their peril. In the end, the demolished yacht proved more valuable as a lesson than it ever had been as a vessel. It taught an entire community about the importance of engaged governance, the dangers of authoritarian leadership, and the necessity of verifying authority before taking irreversible actions. These were expensive lessons, purchased at the cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars and considerable anguish, but they were lessons that the Harborside Estates community would carry forward for generations to come.